Welcome back to the channel. I am the Dynasty Football Strategist. In the last video, I went over my top 10 Dynasty quarterback rankings. Today, we have my top 10 Dynasty running back rankings. In this video, we will see who my top 10 running backs are, as well as describing them, their situation, and a few stats for each player. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. At RB1, I have Breece Hall. He is just 23 years old. He finished as the RB2 overall in 2023 in a terrible offense. That made things challenging for him. He has a 30.3 BMI, which is over the 30.0 threshold. That means that he has the body to sustain a workhorse role in the NFL. He finished with 17.09 fantasy points per game in 2023. So let's talk about his situation. Last year, Aaron Rodgers was done for the season after 7 snaps. This year, Aaron Rodgers is back. That means the offense will be much more efficient with him at the helm rather than Zach Wilson. Last year, their line finished 24th overall, but they signed left tackle Tyron Smith and drafted a tackle in Olu Fashanu in the draft this year in the first round. So let's get into some stats. He finished number 3 in yards created with 1,166, number 10 in yards created per touch with 3.9, number 5 in juke rate per carry at 25.8%, and number 1 in the league in evaded tackles with 77. He did this in the worst of circumstances, and he is the real deal when it comes to talent. He has Rodgers back, and he is my Dynasty RB1 overall. Alright, at RB2 I have Bijan Robinson. He's just 22 years old and in his second year in the league. He finished as the RB9 overall in 2023, and he has a 30.0 BMI. That meets the threshold for a workhorse role in the NFL. Despite having 14.49 fantasy points per game in 2023, he is actually one of the most talented running backs, and this year he's not going to be held back by his head coach Arthur Smith, who was fired. For whatever reason, Arthur Smith hated using his star players. That's why he was picking 8th overall 3 years in a row. The new staff, however, intends to use their star players. Who could have guessed that would help you win games? Their offensive line was number 13 in run blocking in 2023, and the same offensive line remains intact for 2024. You can expect elite RB1 production from Bijan Robinson this year. Alright, let's get into some stats here. He finished 5th in yards created with 1,041, 12th in yards created per touch with 3.83, 9th in yards per touch with 5.4, and 7th in evaded tackles with 63 in 2023. He's going to be an elite RB1. Pass on him at your own risk, and you will regret it if you choose to do so. At RB3, I have Jahmyr Gibbs. He's just 22 years old and in his second year in the NFL. Last year, he finished as the RB10 overall, despite missing a couple games due to injury. He has a 29.4 BMI, which is slightly below the threshold for a workhorse role in the NFL, but he finished with 16.14 fantasy points per game and should be an elite running back this year. So while he's not a bell cow, he gets the high-value touches near the goal line and gets almost all the receptions out of the backfield. The coaching staff has been talking about getting him involved in the slot, and their offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, is one of the most creative minds in the NFL. Their offense is going to score a lot of touchdowns this year, and Jahmyr Gibbs has a ton of touchdown upside this year. Pass on him at your own risk. So, a couple stats about Jahmyr Gibbs. Last year, he was number 7 in true yards per carry with 4.8, 8th in yards per touch with 5.4, 9th in juke rate with a 23.9% juke rate, and finished 2nd in breakaway run rate with 8.2% of his runs going for 15 or more yards. He is an elite running back, and you should treat him as such. So, My Dynasty RB4 overall is Christian McCaffrey. He is 28 years old, but this past year he finished as the RB1 overall, and despite having a 28.2 BMI, which is below the bell cow threshold, he's still treated as a bell cow. He finished with 24.46 fantasy points per game, which was the highest among running backs in 2023. He's as elite as it gets. So as I mentioned, he is 28 years old, but he's shown no signs of slowing down. And he has no serious competition in his backfield, so he should remain the bell cow there. He just signed a 2-year extension with the 49ers, and really the only question is, how much longer is he effective? Well, if his 2024 season goes anything like his 2023 season, drafting him is a great idea and you might win your championship. So, let's get into some stats here. McCaffrey finished first in yards created in 2023 with 1,287, third in yards per touch with 6, first in evaded tackles with 77, and first in breakaway runs with 20. He is as elite as it gets at the running back position, and if he was just a little bit younger, he would be my RB1 overall and in his own tier. It's only due to age that he slips to RB4 in the rankings. So, my RB5 in Dynasty is Jonathan Taylor. He's 25 years old, and despite finishing as the RB33 in 2023, which was due to 4 games missed for a holdout for a new contract and injury, he has a 32.4 BMI, which is in the 92nd percentile among running backs, and finished with 15.64 fantasy points per game in 2023. So, Jonathan Taylor received the 33rd best run blocking in 2023, but he is only 2 years removed from a 2,000-yard, 20-touchdown season. He has massive touchdown upside in Shane Steichen's offense. Plus, he has no competition for touches in the backfield. He is a big man who's going to be fed early and often and is going to score a ton of fantasy points this year. So, the Colts offense should be a lot more efficient this year with Richardson back at the helm, and they brought in wide receiver A.D. Mitchell to be their vertical X receiver to help stretch the field. Having Richardson at the helm should help keep defenses honest and keep them from stacking the box. Plus, the Colts want to protect Anthony Richardson by running the ball. Jonathan Taylor should be a low-end to mid RB1 this year and is going to be an asset to your fantasy team. So, my Dynasty RB6 is Saquon Barkley. He's 27 years old and finished as the RB13 in 2023 because he only played in 14 games. This was due to injury. He has a 31.6 BMI, which is in the 82nd percentile among running backs, and is above the 30.0 threshold. He averaged 15.94 fantasy points per game in 2023. So, in the offseason, Saquon Barkley signed with the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles have an elite offensive line, which was 4th best in run blocking this past year. In this offense, he has no competition for touches in this talent-deficient running back room. He has immense touchdown upside because the Eagles, I think, are going to look to have Jalen Hurts take less hits at the goal line and just run it in with their star running back. A couple stats about Saquon. This past year, he finished 3rd in dominator rating with 34.8% of his team's yards and touchdowns. He finished 8th in breakaway runs with 12, 5th in target share with a 15.3 clip, while receiving the 58th best run blocking. He's not going to have this issue in Philadelphia because the Eagles line is elite, just like Saquon Barkley. He projects to be a low to mid running back 1. So, my Dynasty RB7 is Travis Etienne. He is 25 years old and finished as the RB3 overall this past year. He has a 30.8 BMI, so he meets the threshold for a workhorse role, and thus far in his career, he's been treated as a workhorse running back. This past year, he had 16.61 fantasy points per game, and he is one of the most explosive running backs in the entire league. So, as far as Etienne's situation, He has no serious competition for touches this next year. In fact, the Jaguars drafted wide receiver Brian Thomas in the first round, who's going to be their vertical X receiver, and that will make things easier for ETN because defenses aren't going to be able to stack the box against him. And the offense should score more points, which means potentially more touchdowns for Travis. So, a couple stats about Travis. This past year, he was 4th in yards created with a total of 1,080, 9th in dominator rating with a 27.8% market share of his team's yards and touchdowns, and he finished 4th in evaded tackles with 69 and 15th in breakaway runs with 10. He's an explosive running back in what projects to be an explosive offense. He should be a low to mid RB1 this next year. So, my Dynasty RB8 is Devon Achane. He's 22 years old and in his second year in the league. This past year, he finished as the RB24 overall due to suffering 2 injuries throughout the year and missing some time. He has a 27.8 BMI, which is on the low end of the spectrum, so he's never going to be a workhorse running back, but he did average 17.34 fantasy points per game and is one of the most explosive running backs in the entire league. So, as far as Achane's situation, he is in a committee backfield, but that's perfect for him and his skills. He has a 27.8 BMI, so he's never going to be a workhorse running back. He does, however, offer insane weekly upside due to the scheme. He finds wide open running lanes, and with his elite speed, a 4.32 in the 40-yard dash, it allows him to find wide open holes and exploit them with reckless abandon. So, a couple stats about Achane. He finished 4th in yards created per touch in 2023 with 4.62, 1st in yards per touch with 7.7, 3rd in juke rate with a 27.7% juke rate, and 1st in breakaway run rate with a 12.6% clip there. He's one of the most explosive running backs in the league, and if he can stay healthy, he could definitely be a top 5 running back this year for you in fantasy. So, my Dynasty RB9 is Josh Jacobs. He is 26 years old and finished as the RB28 in 2023. This is because he only played in 13 games due to injury. He has a 31.6 BMI, which is in the 81st percentile among running backs. That's pretty good. He did average 13.9 fantasy points per game, but this is because he was in an awful situation this past year. So, regarding Jacob's situation, this past year he was with the Raiders, but now he signed with the Packers. He's in a much better offense now. Defenses are not going to be able to stuff the box against him because Jordan Love is a credible passer. No one the Raiders played this past year at QB posed any semblance of a threat for defenses. He signed a 3-year deal, but that could be 1 year depending on his performance this year, so you'll need to watch out for that. Want to know how bad his situation was this past year? Well, he received the 46th best run blocking this past year while also facing 7.2 average defenders in the box, which was the highest rate in the NFL. He counteracted that by being 7th in yards per route run with 1.64 and 11th in yards per reception with 8. He projects to be a low to mid RB1 this next year, and he could score quite a few touchdowns in this offense. So, my Dynasty RB10 is Kyren Williams. He's 23 years old, and he finished as the RB7 this past year. He does, however, have a 28.6 BMI, which is well under the threshold for a workhorse role, despite receiving a workhorse role this past year. He did average 21.25 fantasy points per game, but the Rams drafted Blake Corum in the 3rd round, so he may not receive quite as much usage this year. So, regarding Williams' situation, he's in an elite offense with his head coach being Sean McVay. McVay is one of the best offensive minds in the NFL. The downside is that he's at risk of a timeshare. The Rams drafted Blake Corum in the 3rd round, and you don't generally draft running backs in the 3rd round if you don't intend to give them some touches, and he needs to stay healthy because he suffered multiple injuries this past year and already has a foot injury in OTAs. couple stats about Kyron. He finished 9th in yards created in 2023 with 937. He finished 2nd in dominator rating with a 35.1% market share of his team's yards and touchdowns. He finished 10th in juke rate this past year with a 23.5% clip, and he finished 8th in evaded tackles with 61. He's an explosive running back who's very talented, but he does run the risk of a timeshare, and he should project as a low-end RB1. So, a couple players who just missed the list. On the left is Trey Benson, rookie 3rd-round pick for the Cardinals. In 2022, he broke PFF's elusiveness record. In the middle is Rachaad White, running back for the Buccaneers. He finished as a top 5 running back this past year, but his coaching staff has said they want to lessen his workload substantially. On the right is Jonathan Brooks, rookie running back for the Panthers. He's coming off a torn ACL, so he's likely to be eased into action and may take a minute to reach his stride. So there you have it, my top 10 Dynasty running backs, as well as a couple who just missed the list. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you and have a good day.